Hey Greg, how you doing? Nice to
Doing
see
all
you.
right, man. Hey, good to see you as well. Thanks for taking some time to talk to us.
Yeah, of course. It's always good to connect with you and everybody else following along, so this should be good.
Excellent. So, we've going to put the call out if people have questions and that sort of thing. But I know we talked before we started about a couple of things that you can jump into, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday with Cam and Craig. But in this time when there is no water polo to play, but as you know, so many of our fans and followers, this is their identity, right? They are a water polo player. So what are some tips, things people can do to kind of manage that struggle with identifying as a water polo player but not being able to play any water polo?
Yeah, first of all, you hit the nail on the head about probably what a lot of people are struggling with. I thought a lot about this part of the pause that we're in and people not necessarily having that way of expressing themselves or exploring that part of their identity. And sometimes I think this could be a real positive because if we get too tied into being all about our sport, we lose part of that balance in our lives. And it's a great opportunity. Obviously, we have that time to explore who are we and what are we all about. And I know from my personal experience in growing up and having water polo be this outlet for me to maybe even get out of my house and get away from my parents and my siblings and just be a little bit more free. I really had to learn through the years of values and what I'm all about. And I think this is a great opportunity for athletes who are discovering they're really struggling with that self-identity piece is just identifying what are the words that define who they are as a person first, because I think that's always important is understanding you're a person first and then an athlete second. And if you're really grounded in who you are and you bring that into the pool, then you can imagine what you can accomplish with all the challenges and adversity that you face in the pool.
Well, and I think, and I know you've talked about this often when you've given talks to schools and teams and groups and all that sort of thing. You often lean on your own experience, right? As a player, whether there were teams that you were trying out for, or trying to make, or whether you're in the starting lineup or on the bench, that sort of thing. And you've lived that water polo life of not always getting to be the exact place you wanted to be in water polo, and then having to move on with that and still realize that, like you said, you're a person first and a player second.
Yeah, I mean, the sad reality that nobody really wants to face and probably not think about until it comes, but it's going to end, and I personally, I know I didn't really think about that as I was going through it. But when you start to realize it will end at some point, then maybe you stop taking some of these things for granted that you have at your, you know, disposal. And I think it's also pretty important to kind of come to grips with where you are in your sport too. And I think this time right now is a great time to reflect and maybe level set on some of your goals and say, okay, am I on path to working towards those dreams that I have and those outcomes? And maybe do I need to shorten that time frame that I have and maybe think about something a little bit more tangible in terms of start setting these what we call SMART goals. But I think also, like my experience is not going to be everybody else's experience. And as I was going through my education and training, I'm a certified mental performance consultant with the national governing body of sports psychology. I realized that while I have all this great experience and, all these world championships I played in and going through these two Olympic cycles and stuff, I can't necessarily project what I did on everybody else. I have to get really good at asking open-ended questions and being ready to listen actively and be a good sounding board for them so that they can explore their own paths as well.
We're talking about kind of everyone understanding their role in sports, and you bring up a great point about maybe a chance to level set and kind of maybe decide that you need to ramp up the work that you're doing or adjust your expectations. It's interesting in this time though, there is no quote unquote reward, right? So you want to stay motivated to keep a routine, right? To work out as best you can. We know folks don't have access to pools. In some cases, they can't be with their teammates. But this is a weird time where you have to stay motivated, but there isn't those typical rewards of we practice for 5 days, we get to game, or I work out hard and then this happens. This is a bit of a leap of faith, right? With staying motivated, knowing that it will pay off down the road.
Yeah, and this is where we really learn that motivation is not something other people can do to you. People can certainly influence you, excuse me, in the right way, but it's up to you. And we learn that, motivation is a skill, and it's based off of principles like, basic human needs. If you think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or you go into more of an intrinsic mode of motivation, and the one that comes within yourself, and you really learn how to gain things like where your choice in the matter. And you've probably heard a lot in the media and from different experts about controlling what you can control. Well, that's about choice and deciding where to put your efforts. And then, there's two other, I'm talking about a theory in more common language, but it's self-determination theory. And we
Mhm.
know that in order to boost intrinsic motivation, you need to find out autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Well, the second one, relatedness, is about connection. And that's one of the hardest things right now. And I was listening to Cami yesterday talk about physical distancing rather than social distancing. And I think she's right on. And staying connected, because as people, we're driven and guided by that human connection with others. And then competence, that one's a little bit harder to understand, but I mean, I usually think about it in terms of if you know maybe like the first step to take on your path, then and you can get to that point of taking that first step, just getting started, then usually you can find the motivation to keep going as you go through the trials and tribulations of results and understanding, okay, I'm learning here and there, and that sort of stuff.
A question that we got yesterday, and we'll take some more questions soon here from Brian, but one that came up, and I know one that you have talked about in the past, and it's really topical now because nobody can play any water polo, but that anxiety when there is the time to return to water polo, and everyone feeling like they're not ready. And Cami made up the good point that, or said the good point yesterday that, well, everyone's in the same boat more or less, not being able to train with their team. But I'm curious for your take on it, for those folks that are going to be nervous when it's time to get back with their team, feeling maybe they've lost a stroke or not where they were. How do they handle
I was nervous just getting on this Instagram live with you. I think I just had to tell myself, hey, it's normal,
that?
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and I think it's reality that when you get back in the pool and as an athlete, that you're going to lose touch with the ball. You lose that rhythm of the game, and feeling like you just feeling confident in your ability to be at the right in the right mindset, in the right shape and condition. And it's going to hurt too, by the way. I mean, some things you just can't get around physically. But at the same time, the more that you can expose yourself to some of those emotions that you think you're going to experience or fears, the less weight that they have. So one piece of advice that I've been giving to athletes that I'm still working with right now is practicing mental imagery and visualization. So seeing in your mind's eye some of those situations that you might preview you're going to come into when you jump back in that water. And recently I've been thinking, I work with our men's team, and we had a staff meeting, and our head coach Dejan Udovic told us, just as quickly as everything kind of disbanded and fell apart, right? And we lost all of these freedoms that we had in our sport, it could easily just as quickly be back on. And if we're not ready, then we're going to have to be playing even more catch up than we already are. So I think it's really important for us to act and practice with as much power as we can, as if things are going to be on, maybe tomorrow or the next day. And you're thinking more of the short term, right? Not so much the long term.
We're talking with Brian Alexander, who works with, as you mentioned, our men's national team, also heavily involved in the Olympic development program and other water polo teams and sports around the country. Water polo players are often labeled resilient, right? It is a difficult, challenging sport, one that requires a lot of focus, a lot of physical intensity. Well, this is going to test everyone's resiliency, whether you play water polo or not. How do you bounce back from not knowing what's next? I mean, you just talked about, right? We could be back on sooner, or it could be a little bit longer. That uncertainty, I know, is tough for many athletes of any age to handle.
Yeah, well, a lot of the pressure, the nerves come from uncertainty of the outcome and how it's going to turn out. And so I think that's one thing to just understand and acknowledge. And I've been working with this little pseudo model of resilience so to speak, in terms of everything starts with awareness. And I think about acknowledging what's happening in your environment, internally, what you're experiencing, maybe the emotions involved, and how you're kind of responding to everything. Because once you acknowledge it, then you start working towards accepting it. And that's the hardest part usually. You can know there's an issue and still not accept that, hey, I got to do something about it. So you acknowledge it, you work towards accepting it, and then you make a plan of action of what you're going to do about it. So a lot of times we go through these kind of coping skills with stress, and one of them that's really, an adaptive coping skill is problem focus. Well, I like to think about solution focus and planning. What am I going to do and how I'm going to take action? Because that's the last step, right? Then you go for it based on your plan, and you might fall on your face, you might fail, right? But at the same time, you're actually learning in that process so that you can go through the same steps again and get towards improvement.
Talking with Brian Alexander, ODP mental skills coach and expert in this area, and fortunate enough to have him work in the world of water polo, a former player. We have the full gamut here of ages that interact in the water polo community, right? So from the masters athletes, right, that are 60 plus, still getting after it, to our youngest players. I think a lot of what you're talking about, right, really probably hits home for the competitive athlete that is at that high school age, maybe middle school age and above, college. For those that are maybe parents, they have a younger kid in the house, or younger kids that are going to see this, or maybe it's an older sibling that can relay something. For that younger kid, the 10 through 12, maybe even younger, any different messaging or thoughts that maybe is a little bit something easier for those folks to digest that are not, as focused on the championships, they just know they missed the thing they love.
Yeah, I think it's, everybody, again, depending on how old you are or where you're at in your career, or what else you're involved in, you're going to experience this differently. I can't go without making it important, through this interview. I can't go without making it important to breathe, and learning that as a foundational skill to anything. Because like it's the essence of life, right? We wouldn't be here without breathing, but at the same time, you can breathe effectively with different strategies in place for what you're doing for performance. So that's one of the most important bases of everything that we're doing. Because if you're not using your breath to your advantage, right, then you start going on these emotional roller coasters, or stress gets the best of you and your capacity blows up, and you go on all these different rides, and maybe your relationships are severed because of that. So learning how to breathe is really important for anything in life, and at any age too.
Talking with Brian Alexander. If you have any questions for Brian, if you're struggling from a mental standpoint to really kind of reconcile the fact that you haven't been in the pool for a little while and you don't know when you're going to get back into the water, this is an area where Brian can help. So feel free to drop your questions in the comments. Brian, you also played the sport at a high level, and anyone who's come on this week and last couple of weeks, one question we get a ton is, what can I be doing? I have no access to a pool, but I'm home. I want to stay fit in some fashion. Anything that's worked well for you, some advice you might pass along just from kind of a physical fitness standpoint of what people could be doing to try and stay active?
Yeah, I think one, Cami hit on it yesterday, is a routine, but tying into your routines some kind of physical activity every single day, and getting that heart rate up. I'm not a medical professional by any means, but at least for me, it's like up over 120 beats per minute for about 30 minutes minimum. I've really got into cycling again on the bike, but what I kind of do too is, and I did this while I was playing a little bit. I wish I would have known more, but I try and pair up my imagery and visualization practice with my movement. And I imagine myself in a physical situation, like a game situation, but I pair it up with the actual exercise and feeling my heart beating, and trying to manage that physiological response, as well as any emotional side effects to that, and just seeing, okay, this is how I'm going to handle this situation. This is how I work through what I'm going through physically. And I think that sort of helps prime the mind a little bit to be in that competitive landscape, or that competitive state of mind.
It's interesting. You've talked a lot about visualization, and of course, breathing and managing your emotions. And um, not that anyone doesn't believe this stuff, right? But if you're someone who has just been a player, right, and you haven't really tapped into the mental side of it as much, and you feel like maybe that's not something you need to focus on, right? You just know the water polo, and that's all that you'll need. Do you have maybe a story or an anecdote or something that comes to mind as far as someone you worked with or someone you've explained this stuff to, and how it really made a change in their life? I'm just thinking about the person that maybe hasn't heard someone like you speak before, and they're uncertain of a tangible outcome for this sort of way of thinking.
I love that question because I had a hard time myself when we had a sports psychologist come and work with our team who's actually still a mentor of mine. But in the early 2005 2006 year, and he started us out with a lot of mindfulness practices, and we were looking around. We had like Tony Azevedo and Bailey and Powers and Jesse and Bobby, all these guys that have been around then. Jesse was young, he's young, but all these other guys that have been around, and we were looking at each other like, what is this guy doing? This is crazy. And then slowly and slowly and slowly we bought in, and we realized that even though we were doing 6-7 hours a day in the pool, right, we were getting all this physical training in, but we weren't really intentionally training the mental game. And I think what changed was our buy-in in terms of what it really takes to be elite in anything you do. You can't just like go through your practice and say, okay, it's done after that, right? While the physical side of it and the tactical and technical side of learning in the pool while you're doing it, it helps. You have to train the mental side out of it, out of the pool. So I think, buying into the idea of mental training, mental skills are meant to be practiced. They're not just a byproduct of all the physical training. And that's really important. We won the silver. We got to the gold medal game in 2008. And there was a lot of factors. I'm not saying it was just because of mental training all of a sudden, right? But I think this really did kind of help. And even like with our national team guys now, we're doing video sessions and having them write notes on what they see. And I'm pretty sure through that process of note taking and watching videos, and I know like 6-8 Sports is doing some cool stuff with their app and tracking an athlete, right? You're actually going through these mental representations of what you see and translating it in your mind's eye and understanding, hey, maybe this is how I see this, or this is how I might do this sort of move that I'm watching.
I've heard more than one athlete kind of compare the situation to being injured. And of course, it only works if you've been injured before. But for those that have had to sit out for 3-6 months, a year, rehabbing something, they tend to come away with that perspective that you're talking about when you've been kind of almost removed. Now you're like the narrator of this show that's going on in front of you, and you have to kind of take it in as a third party. It gives them that extra perspective of not only what they love about the sport they play and what they miss, but also things, little micro adjustments that they can make when they get back in the pool.
Yeah, I have a sticky note that I put up right in front of where I'm sitting and doing work every day. It says small wins. And I think that's what we're trying to find. And the truth is that that's how you actually build confidence. It's from these micro successes, and you have to train your attention to find those things throughout your day. And so doing things like a gratitude practice when you wake up in the morning helps you look for the things that you're grateful for, or even at the end of the day, 3 positive things or successes that you had helps you then get ready for the next day and what you're going to achieve on top of that. So I think, these types of things are really, really important for just your overall mindset and well-being. And one of the challenges, especially, you mentioned returning from injury. It's funny, I just got off of a meeting with an athlete who had been injured and he's recovering. You can experience a great deal of loss, right? And not having the physical capability to actually do the thing that makes you whole, going back to not having your sport available. So you go through different stages, and that could be a real mental health concern for some people that don't have the resources or haven't been working on the mental side of their sport.
Talking with Brian Alexander here. We'll take a few more questions before we let Brian get on his way here. Just looking back through, another question kind of comes through as it relates to physical training. Um, this person says they have a good size yard. They're running, they're able to do a little soccer, that sort of thing. Anything else as far as a good recommendation for what could be part of that daily routine? And maybe as it relates to your world, Brian, it's not even necessarily as much physical as it is something mental to work into that routine.
Um, yeah, I think it's a good idea to just stay connected to the ball. I remember when I was in age group in high school, our coach told us all to take a ball home and just lay on our bed and throw the ball up and catch it, over and over again. I think that really helps you feel like you're still connected. I mean, like there's a lot of sensory information that comes in through your fingertips and confidence with the fact that, oh yeah, I know what that ball feels like in my hand. So maybe that would be one thing. There's a ton out there on the internet, get
Sure.
creative. So yeah.
You mentioned that you've been working with the men's senior national team and part of their video chats, and these are the athletes that are at the highest level when you're talking about men's water polo here in the U.S. I think, without naming any names or anything of that nature, but just to give our other athletes, a sense that we're all in this together. What are some of the other things, some of the other questions, concerns that you're trying to address with even the guys that are vying to be Olympians as they navigate this really unprecedented circumstance?
Um, I think one of the things that continues to come up is maintaining a sense of optimism that
Hmm.
things are going to come back around because it can easily look bleak and negative, and you can easily adapt a pessimistic point of view. Um, I think that's an important part of this process, and you know, being able to identify the reasons why this is going to work out rather than the reasons why it's not or it won't. It shapes what you focus on. You give power to what you focus on. So that's one thing. And I think just setting your intentions every day on how you're going to be successful or productive that day. And maybe it's not a ton of things. Maybe it's like one or two things. I know there's a lot of student athletes here and they're adapting to online classes. So we want to make sure that, you go through your structure, you find structure, but you go through it, but then you also have these extras that give you this sense of purpose and meaning. And we have an app out there, WellU Mental Trainings, our mental training app, and there's a ton of exercises in there that people can learn from that we're using.
And before we let you go, as we're talking about all of this stuff, is there anything else that comes to mind? Some other things people should know or be thinking about? Kind of a parting thought here.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is this is all about going through your own steps, your own process towards accepting the new normal, but then adapting and finding ways to find power in a somewhat powerless situation, right? We had a lot of freedoms taken away or postponed from us for the time being. So controlling what you can control is all about finding your source of power and working with that rather than saying, hey, I don't have anything, or looking for what you don't have.
And then the last thing, Brian, I know you work with teams, athletes. If folks are interested in talking to you more about kind of your mental skills coaching, either on a one-on-one basis or with a team, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so first of all, like I mentioned, you can train on your own. We've got a mental training app, WellU Mental Training, and then you can go to my website, athletementalskillscoach.com, and you can contact me through there. And we're pumping out some content on social media to support people, and I'd love to just chat with you and see how I can help. So yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Hey, Brian, always good to talk with you. I think you shared some important things today. I know mental health is always important, but now more than ever, when some of the things we love aren't as readily available. So appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks. Take care, guys.